I'm 72 years old now, and for 44 years I've been carrying a secret that the agency classified above top secret, a designation I didn't even know existed until my first day in the Maritime Anomalies Division. My name is Dr. Richard Halstead, and from 1980 to 2016, I tracked something the government has been monitoring since before the Cold War began: intelligent aquatic humanoids that we, in our limited understanding, called mermaids. I grew up in San Diego, spent my childhood tide pooling at La Jolla Cove, and earned my doctorate in marine biology at Scripps Institution of Oceanography in 1979. I studied bioluminescence in deep-sea organisms. My dissertation focused on how certain species produce light at depths where sunlight never reaches. I thought I understood what lived in the ocean. I was wrong. In May 1980, I received a letter on Naval Undersea Warfare Center letterhead inviting me to interview for a research position. The address was in Newport, Rhode Island. I flew out on a Tuesday expecting to discuss my work on photophore structures in lanternfish. Instead, two men met me in a windowless room with no nameplate on the door. They wore suits that looked expensive but forgettable. One was maybe 50, gray at the temples. The other was younger, 30s, with a manila folder he never opened. The older man asked me one question. "Dr. Halstead, if you discovered a species with human-level intelligence in the ocean, would you tell anyone?" I sat there for maybe 30 seconds. My instinct was to say yes. That scientific discovery belongs to the world. But something in how he asked it, the way both men watched my face, made me reconsider. I thought about how governments handle sensitive information. I thought about what happens when something valuable or dangerous gets discovered. I thought about the Navy's involvement. "No," I said. "Not immediately. I'd document it properly first, understand what I was looking at, consider the implications." The younger man wrote something in a notebook. The older man nodded once. "You'll receive instructions within 48 hours, he said. "If you choose to follow them, your life will change in ways you can't currently imagine. If you don't, you'll return to your research at Scripps and never hear from us again. Either choice is acceptable." They stood. The interview was over. I'd been in that room for less than 5 minutes. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a date, time, and address in Virginia. No explanation, no signature. I almost threw it away. But I got on the plane. That was May 1980. I didn't return to Scripps. I didn't publish my dissertation research. For the next 36 years, I worked for a division of the CIA that doesn't appear in any organizational chart, studying something that most people believe exists only in fairy tales. This is why I'm violating my security clearance now. This is why I'm risking federal prosecution. Because what I learned matters more than my oath of silence, and because what's happening now in our oceans requires someone to speak up before it's too late. The address in Virginia led to an office park outside Langley that looked like it housed insurance adjusters. Building C, 3rd floor, Suite 309. The door was locked. I knocked twice. A woman in her 40s opened it, looked at my ID, and let me inside without saying a word. The office had 6 desks, filing cabinets along one wall, and fluorescent lights that hummed. 3 other people worked at computers. Nobody looked up when I entered. The woman walked me to a back room where the same 2 men from Rhode Island were waiting. "Sit down, Dr. Halstead," the older man said. He pulled a folder from a briefcase, not the one from the interview. This was thicker, held together with metal clasps. "What I'm about to show you is classified under a special access program. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement that has no expiration date. You'll never discuss what you see here with anyone outside this division, including family, colleagues, or future employers. You'll face federal prosecution if you violate this agreement. Do you understand?" "I understand." He slid papers across the table. I read them twice. The language was specific about penalties. 20 years minimum for disclosure of classified material related to non-human intelligence entities. That phrase stood out. Non-human intelligence entities, not foreign nationals, not weapons systems, something else. I signed. The older man opened the folder and removed a photograph, black and white, slightly grainy, dated August 1958 in the corner. It showed what looked like a submarine periscope view of open water. In the center of the frame, partially submerged, was a figure. This was taken by USS Nautilus during a training exercise off the coast of Greenland, he said. The submarine was at periscope depth, conducting routine surveillance. The sonar operator detected movement. That didn't match any known marine life. The captain ordered photographs. I looked closer. The figure had a human-like head and shoulders above the waterline, dark hair plastered to the scalp. The angle made it hard to see details, but the proportions looked wrong. Shoulders too narrow, neck too long. The submarine tracked this individual for 17 minutes, the older man continued. During that time, it dove to depths exceeding 400 feet and maintained speeds of 15 knots. No breathing apparatus visible, no mechanical propulsion. He laid out 6 more photographs. Each showed the same figure from different angles. In one image, it was diving. You could see the torso transitioning into something else below the waist, though the water distortion made it unclear. Another photo caught it surfacing. Its mouth was open, teeth visible. August 1958 was not the first sighting, he said. It was the first time we got photographs clear enough to brief the Secretary of Defense. After that briefing, this division was created. The younger man spoke for the first time. We're called the Maritime Anomalies Division, MAD for short. Officially, we don't exist. Our budget comes from discretionary defense spending that Congress doesn't audit. We report directly to the Deputy Director of Operations, nobody else. What do you track? I asked. Aquatic humanoids, the older man said. The agency designation is AH-1 through AH-7, based on morphological variations observed in different geographic regions. You'll learn the classification system during orientation. For now, understand this. They're real, they're intelligent, and they've been avoiding human contact for reasons we're still trying to determine. He pulled out another photograph. This one was in color, dated June 1973, a research vessel deck at sunset. In the foreground, several crew members stood at the rail, looking down at the water. Below them, barely visible in the choppy waves, was a face. Definitely humanoid, definitely not human. Large eyes, too far apart, skin that reflected light like wet stone. This was taken by a Navy oceanographic survey team off Hawaii, the older man said. 3 crew members saw it. It observed them for approximately 2 minutes before descending. Sonar tracked it to 800 feet, then it disappeared. Acoustically, it just vanished. We still don't know how they do that. I stared at the photograph. My training told me to be skeptical. Look for hoaxes, misidentifications, equipment malfunction. But these were military photographs with documentation chains, time stamps, witness statements. The level of fabrication required would involve dozens of people across multiple decades. Why me? I asked. Because you're a marine biologist who understands deep-sea environments, the younger man said, and because you answered our question correctly. We need people who can keep secrets, document properly, and think critically about what they're observing. Most scientists would immediately want to publish. You said you'd consider implications first. The older man closed the folder. You'll spend 6 months in orientation, learning our protocols and studying previous encounter documentation. After that, you'll deploy on research vessels equipped with specialized monitoring equipment. Your cover will be marine biology research, which is also your actual job. You'll collect data on ocean environments while simultaneously watching for AH encounters. Sometimes years pass between sightings. Sometimes you get multiple contacts in one deployment. The work requires patience. What's the objective? I asked. Documentation, the older man said. We need to understand their behavior patterns, migration routes, population distribution, and social structures. Right now, we're building a database. Eventually, we may attempt contact, but we only get one chance. If we approach wrong and they decide to avoid us permanently, we lose access to the most significant biological discovery in human history. He stood. You start Monday. Report to this office at 0800. Bring nothing from your previous work. Everything you need will be provided. I walked out into a May afternoon that looked exactly like it had 2 hours earlier. Same traffic, same people. But everything had changed. I'd just learned that something impossible was real, and I'd agreed to spend my career studying it in secret. I was 28 years old. I didn't realize I was joining a project that had been running since before I was born, or that the secrets I'd learned would eventually force me to choose between my oath and my conscience. My orientation lasted 6 months. Every morning I arrived at Suite 309 by 8 and left after 6. No weekends off. They gave me access to filing cabinets that contained every documented AH encounter from 1958 to 1980. Hundreds of reports, photographs, sonar readings, witness statements from Navy personnel, Coast Guard crews, commercial fishermen, and research scientists who'd been debriefed and sworn to secrecy. The oldest file was labeled 0 Alpha, August 1958. It contained the complete documentation from the USS Nautilus encounter. I read it 3 times. The incident occurred on August 19, 1958, at 0847 hours. The Nautilus was conducting a training exercise in the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland. Weather was clear, sea state calm. The submarine was at periscope depth, traveling at 8 knots. At 0847, the sonar operator reported an unknown contact, bearing 045, range 200 yards. The signal didn't match any known submarine, too small, too fast, moving in a pattern that suggested biological origin. The captain ordered periscope observation. The captain's log entry described a humanoid figure swimming at the surface approximately 400 yards distant, moving perpendicular to our heading. The periscope officer took 12 photographs over 17 minutes while the submarine tracked the contact. During that time, the figure dove repeatedly. Sonar tracked it to depths of 430 feet. It stayed submerged for intervals ranging from 4 to 9 minutes. When it surfaced, it would remain at the waterline for 1 to 2 minutes before diving again. Speed underwater was estimated at 15 knots. At 0904, the figure turned toward the submarine. For approximately 30 seconds, it remained at the surface, facing the periscope. Then it dove and was not seen again. Sonar tracked it descending to 600 feet before the signal faded. The captain radioed Naval intelligence immediately. They ordered the Nautilus to remain in the area for 6 hours. No additional contacts appeared. At 1500 hours, the submarine returned to base. 3 days later, 2 investigators from Naval Intelligence interviewed every crew member who'd observed the contact, 17 men total. All gave consistent descriptions: humanoid upper body, dark hair, skin tone that appeared gray or dark brown in the water, proportions that didn't match human anatomy. The periscope officer noted the eyes. He said they were larger than human eyes, positioned slightly more to the sides of the head, and when the figure looked directly at the periscope, they reflected light. Not red eye like in photographs. A pale green reflection similar to cat eyes. Naval Intelligence concluded, crew observations are consistent and credible. Photographic evidence supports presence of unknown biological entity displaying locomotion inconsistent with known marine mammals. Recommend continued surveillance and further investigation. That investigation became the Maritime Anomalies Division. I spent 2 weeks analyzing the File 0 photographs. The figure's proportions were measurable in 3 images: shoulder width approximately 14 inches, head height from chin to crown approximately 9 inches. The torso visible above water appeared to be 18-20 inches long. Everything was slightly compressed compared to human anatomy. Narrower shoulders, longer neck, smaller. Head relative to body size. Below the waterline, the body structure became difficult to analyze because of refraction and wave distortion. But in one photograph, taken as the figure was diving, you could see the transition. The torso tapered into something that wasn't legs. The shape suggested a single structure, but the water blur made certainty impossible. The hands were visible in 2 photographs, 5 fingers, webbing between them extending roughly halfway up each digit. The webbing appeared translucent. After File 0, I read chronologically through every encounter report. The pattern was clear. Sightings occurred in deep water near continental shelves, almost always in areas with underwater geological features like trenches, seamounts, or hydrothermal vents. They avoided shallow coastal waters. They avoided shipping lanes. They appeared most frequently during new moon phases, though that correlation wasn't absolute. The reports showed increasing sophistication in observation methods. By the 1970s, the Navy had equipped certain vessels with specialized sonar designed to track biological targets. By 1978, underwater cameras were being deployed in known sighting areas. The footage was often grainy and inconclusive, but twice, once in 1976 off Alaska and once in 1979 near the Azores, cameras captured clear images of individuals moving through deep water. The 1979 footage lasted 8 seconds. It showed a figure swimming at an estimated 12 knots at a depth of 650 feet. The camera's lights illuminated it from below. You could see the streamlined body shape, the powerful tail movement, the way the arms remained close to the torso during high-speed swimming. You could see the moment it noticed the camera. It stopped, turned, approached within 10 feet of the lens, and examined the equipment for perhaps 3 seconds. Then it swam away, accelerating so rapidly it left the frame in under 2 seconds. That footage convinced me this wasn't mice identification. The movement was too smooth, too efficient. The body mechanics were wrong for a human in diving equipment. And the reaction to the camera, that moment of curiosity followed by rapid departure, suggested awareness and decision-making. I was sitting in the file room when I reached that conclusion, surrounded by stacks of reports. The implications hit me. These beings existed. They'd been here all along, living in an environment we'd barely explored, avoiding contact with a species they clearly knew existed. They were intelligent enough to recognize surveillance equipment and fast enough to evade it. 3 months later, my orientation ended. They assigned me to my first deployment, a research vessel conducting surveys off the Azores. The ship was called the Atlantis II. We'd be at sea for 6 weeks. My orders were simple: conduct legitimate marine biology research during the day, monitor specialized sonar equipment at night, and document anything unusual. I was 29 years old when I boarded that ship in November 1982. I'd spent half a year learning about creatures that shouldn't exist. I'd studied photographs and sonar data until I could identify signatures in my sleep. But reading reports and seeing one yourself are different things. The Atlantis II was a 180-foot research vessel operated by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. It had been modified for mad operations, though only 4 of us on board knew that. To everyone else, it was a standard marine biology research expedition studying deep-sea thermal vent ecosystems near the Azores. I shared a cabin with another marine biologist named Stevens, who studied tube worms and bacterial colonies around hydrothermal vents. During the day, I assisted with his research, collecting samples, cataloging species, documenting water chemistry. It was real science. The cover story worked because the science was genuine. At night, after most of the crew had turned in, I went to a small equipment room near the stern marked "Restricted, Authorized Personnel Only." Inside were monitors connected to specialized sonar arrays and underwater cameras that weren't part of the official research equipment. Two other people had access: the ship's communications officer, who was actually a Navy sonar specialist, and the expedition's funding coordinator, who was actually my supervisor from MAD. We called him Hayes. Late 40s, gray beard, looked like he'd spent his whole career at sea. He'd been with MAD since 1973. This was his 18th deployment. Most trips, you see nothing. Hayes told me on my second night aboard. You'll spend 6 weeks staring at monitors, watching schools of fish and the occasional shark. Maybe you'll get excited about a whale. Then you'll go home and write a report that says, "No AH contacts observed." That's the job most of the time. We were monitoring 3 camera systems positioned at depths ranging from 500 to 900 feet. The cameras were attached to a research array that the official expedition team had deployed to study vent systems. They thought the cameras were documenting vent plume behavior. They were, but they were also watching for something else. The sonar specialist, a woman named Chen, monitored acoustic data. She'd programmed the system to alert for specific signatures, movement patterns, and acoustic profiles that matched AH observations from previous encounters. Most alerts were false positives: dolphins, whales, large sharks. On November 24, 1982, 8 days into the expedition, I was alone in the equipment room at 02:30 hours. Hayes had gone to sleep. Chen was reviewing the day's acoustic data on headphones. I was watching 3 monitors showing underwater footage from our camera array. The deepest camera, positioned at 870 feet near a thermal vent, showed the usual scene: particle-rich water, occasional fish passing through the lights, the rocky terrain of the ocean floor. I'd been watching that same view for hours. At 02:47, something moved across the frame, fast. Too fast for me to process at first. Just a blur of motion from left to right, gone in maybe 2 seconds. I sat forward and started the playback. Chen pulled off her headphones. "Did you see something?" I advanced the footage frame by frame. At timestamp 02:47:33, the left side of the frame showed empty water. At 02:47:34, a shape entered. At 02:47:35, it was center frame. At 02:47:36, it was exiting right. 4 frames. But those 4 seconds were enough. The shape was definitely biological, definitely humanoid. Swimming horizontally through the water column approximately 15 feet above the ocean floor. The body position was prone, arms tucked close to the torso, propulsion coming entirely from the lower body. The tail, you could see it clearly, moved in a powerful vertical oscillation, driving the creature through the water at what I estimated was 12 to 15 knots. "Call Hayes," I said. Hayes arrived within 3 minutes, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. I played the footage twice. He picked up a phone and made an encrypted satellite call. "Confirm AH contact at 02:47 hours, Hayes said. "Single individual, depth 870 feet, estimated speed 12 knots, bearing southwest. Duration 4 seconds. He listened, then hung up. "They want us to stay on station," Hayes told us. "We're authorized to deploy the mobile camera." The mobile camera was a tethered system that could be remotely piloted from the equipment room. It was supposedly for inspecting vent structures. Actually, it was designed for tracking AH individuals if we got a contact. We deployed it at 03:15 hours. The camera descended on a fiber optic cable that provided real-time video feed. Hayes piloted it, navigating through the darkness 870 feet below us, searching the area where we'd seen the contact. For an hour, we found nothing. At 04:17, Chen said quietly, "I have acoustic contact, bearing 190, range approximately 300 yards, depth 850 feet, single source biological signature." Hayes turned the camera. The light swept across empty water. "It's moving," Chen said. "Slow. Maybe 3 knots. Circling." "Circling what?" Hayes asked. "Us," Chen said. Hayes started piloting the camera in a slow 360-degree pan. At bearing 205, the camera lights caught something. She was there, roughly 40 feet from the camera, partially visible at the edge of the light range, vertical in the water, hovering, just hanging there, motionless, watching us. My first coherent thought was, she, not it. The body shape read as female, narrower shoulders, broader hips, visible mammary structures. Her proportions were streamlined. Every part of her body served a hydrodynamic function. Her skin appeared gray in the artificial lights, with darker mottling across the shoulders and arms. Her hair moved independently in the current, each strand shifting as if it had its own response to water movement. Her eyes were large, positioned more laterally than human eyes, and they reflected the camera's lights with that pale green color documented in every previous encounter. She watched us for 17 minutes. Hayes kept the camera still. No movements, no zooming, nothing that might startle her. We documented everything. Chen took acoustic readings. I made notes, depth, water temperature, visibility, behavior observations. The creature never came closer. She maintained that 40-foot distance, just hovering at the edge of our lights, occasionally shifting position, but always keeping us in view. Her tail moved in slow, lazy undulations that kept her stable in the current. Her hands, clearly five-fingered, clearly webbed, rested at her sides. At one point, she tilted her head. The gesture was so human it made my chest tighten. She was evaluating us, trying to understand what we were. Then, at Oi 434, she turned and swam away. Not panicked, not rushed, just a decision to leave. She accelerated smoothly and disappeared into the darkness beyond our lights. Chen tracked her, acoustically for another 2 minutes, then lost the signal. She went deep, Chen said. Below 1,000 feet. That's the limit of our array. Hayes pulled the camera back and sat back in his chair. I couldn't speak. I'd just watched something that wasn't supposed to exist, something intelligent and curious, something that had chosen to observe us as much as we'd observed her. She'd maintained distance because she was being careful. She'd watched for 17 minutes because she was gathering information. She'd left when she decided she'd seen enough. That was intelligence. That was decision-making. We stayed on station for another 3 days. We had 2 more brief acoustic contacts, but never saw her again. On November 28th, we returned to port. I wrote a 47-page report documenting everything we'd observed. Hayes submitted it through encrypted channels. I was 29 years old. I'd been with MAD for 18 months, and I just confirmed that everything they'd told me was true. The creatures existed. They were intelligent. And they'd been living in our oceans, watching us, avoiding us, for longer than we'd been watching them. Between 1983 and 1987, I deployed on 11 different research expeditions across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. Most resulted in no contacts. 3 produced acoustic signatures that might have been AH individuals, but couldn't be confirmed. One off the coast of Japan in 1985 gave us 14 seconds of footage showing 2 juveniles, we assumed juveniles based on size, swimming together at 600 feet. But my real education during those years came from the archives. Between deployments, I spent weeks in the file room at Suite 309, reading documentation that predated the Maritime Anomalies Division by centuries. The agency employed archaeologists. Not many people knew this. They worked in a separate office in McLean, cataloging historical references to aquatic humanoids across every culture that had left written records. Their job was to identify patterns in mythology, folklore, and historical accounts that might indicate actual encounters rather than pure fiction. In February 1987, I was granted access to their database. What I found changed how I understood these beings. The earliest documented reference was Babylonian, dated approximately 2000 BCE. A clay tablet fragment described fish people who emerged from the Persian Gulf to teach humans agriculture and astronomy. The tablet called them Oans, and described them as having human heads and torsos with fish tails covered in scales that reflected moonlight. The archaeologists noted 17 separate ancient Mesopotamian texts mentioning similar beings over a 1,500-year period. All described them as intelligent, capable of communication, and generally benevolent toward humans. All mentioned that they appeared during specific lunar phases and disappeared back into the sea. Greek sources were extensive: Homer's sirens, Ovid's sea nymphs, Pliny the Elder's account of Nereids observed by Roman sailors near the Strait of Gibraltar. The descriptions varied, but common elements appeared: humanoid upper bodies, fish-like lower bodies, intelligence, and preference for deep water. Medieval European sources documented hundreds of sightings. Ship logs from the 1300s through the 1700s contained references to mer people observed in the North Atlantic, Mediterranean, and North Sea. The reports were matter-of-fact, listed alongside weather conditions and navigation notes. Sailors documented these encounters the same way they documented whale sightings, as notable but not particularly shocking observations of marine life. The agency's archaeologists had mapped every historical reference geographically and chronologically. The pattern was clear: sightings clustered in areas with deep water access near coastlines. Mediterranean sightings concentrated around Cyprus, Crete, and the Aegean Sea. Atlantic sightings followed the mid-Atlantic ridge. Pacific sightings appeared most frequently near Indonesia, Japan, and Polynesia. More importantly, the historical record showed cyclical patterns: periods of frequent sightings followed by decades or even centuries of absence. The archaeologists correlated these cycles with human maritime activity. When shipping traffic increased in an area, sightings decreased. When wars or economic collapse reduced human presence at sea, sightings increased. The last major sighting period in the Mediterranean occurred between 1650 and 1680. Ship logs from that era documented dozens of encounters. Then, as Mediterranean trade expanded and naval warfare intensified during the 1700s, the sightings stopped. The last confirmed Mediterranean encounter before the modern era was 1702, documented by a French merchant vessel near Malta. In May 1987, I was assigned to an expedition in the Mediterranean specifically to investigate whether populations still existed in their historical territories. The research vessel was Greek, operated by the Hellenic Center for Marine Research. Our cover was studying deep-sea coral ecosystems. Our actual objective was to deploy monitoring equipment in areas that had produced the highest concentration of historical sightings. We spent 6 weeks surveying waters around Crete, Cyprus, and the Aegean Islands. We deployed cameras at depths ranging from 500 to 1,200 feet. We monitored acoustic signatures 24 hours a day. We investigated underwater cave systems and trench formations that might serve as shelter or breeding grounds. On June 18, 1987, our acoustic array detected something unusual near an underwater canyon system 40 miles south of Crete. Multiple biological signatures moving in coordinated patterns at depths between 800 and 1,000 feet. At least 6 distinct sources, possibly more. We deployed our mobile camera system immediately. What we recorded over the next 3 hours was the most significant documentation since File 0. They were hunting. 6 individuals moving in a coordinated pattern, herding a school of tuna through the canyon. They communicated with each other using vocalizations. Our hydrophones recorded clicks, whistles, and more complex sounds that our analysis later showed contained structured patterns consistent with language. Their hunting technique was sophisticated. They positioned themselves to block escape routes, driving the fish into a narrow section of the canyon where they could be caught more easily. They took turns pursuing and resting. When one individual caught a fish, the others maintained the pattern, keeping the school contained. We documented 47 minutes of this behavior before they apparently noticed our camera. One individual approached to within 20 feet, examined the equipment for perhaps 10 seconds, then made a series of rapid clicking sounds. The entire group immediately dispersed, vanishing into different sections of the canyon within seconds. But those 47 minutes provided more behavioral data than the previous 29 years of MAD operations combined. We had evidence of cooperative hunting. We had vocalizations that suggested complex communication. We had proof that they possessed social structure and coordinated group tactics. The expedition's senior researcher, a Greek marine biologist named Stavros, who had no knowledge of MAD, was baffled. "I've never seen dolphins hunt like that," he said, reviewing the footage. "The body structure is wrong. The vocalizations don't match any known cetacean species. What are we looking at?" I told him I didn't know. I said we'd send the footage to specialists in the United States for analysis. He accepted that explanation because he had no reason not to. The footage went to Langley. The analysis took 3 months. Linguists studied the vocalizations. Behavioral specialists examined the hunting patterns. Anatomists measured body proportions from different camera angles. The conclusions were classified at the highest level. The vocalizations contained elements of syntax, different sounds combined in patterns that appeared rule-governed. The hunting behavior required planning and real-time coordination. The anatomical analysis confirmed these were not any known species of marine mammal. More significantly, the presence of 6 individuals hunting together suggested population densities higher than previous estimates had indicated. If 6 could be found in one location, that implied a breeding population existed in the Mediterranean despite the absence of sightings for nearly 300 years. They hadn't disappeared. They'd learned to avoid detection. That realization shifted how MAD approached its mission. We weren't studying a rare species clinging to survival in remote locations. We were studying a species that had successfully adapted to human oceanic presence by becoming invisible. They'd learned our patterns, our technologies, our behaviors. They'd learned to stay hidden. The question became, what would it take for them to reveal themselves? And should we even try to force that contact? In January 1988, MAD launched Project Tethys. The objective was to establish communication protocols with populations. The project ran for 6 years and consumed a significant portion of MAD's operational budget. I was assigned as one of 3 senior researchers. The approach was methodical. We identified 12 locations worldwide where encounters had been most frequent and deployed permanent monitoring stations. Each station included underwater speakers, light arrays, and cameras. We would attempt different communication methods at each location and document any responses. The first method was acoustic. We broadcast sequences of tones at frequencies we knew individuals could hear based on previous acoustic recordings. Simple patterns, 3 tones, pause, 3 tones. Then more complex sequences based on mathematical principles, prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, ratios that appeared in nature. For 8 months, we received no responses. The acoustic broadcasts continued on automated cycles at all 12 stations. We documented everything, hoping to identify patterns in when individuals were present versus absent. In September 1988, the station off Tasmania recorded something. The automated system had broadcast a sequence of prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. 12 hours later, our hydrophones recorded sounds in the same frequency range. Not the same sequence, but a response, 17, 19, 23, 29. The next 4 prime numbers. We spent 3 days analyzing the recording, ruling out equipment malfunction, natural ocean sounds, and whale vocalizations. The sounds were at the same frequency as our broadcast. They occurred in the precise rhythm we'd used, and they continued the mathematical sequence. Project Tethys immediately shifted focus to Tasmania. We sent a research vessel with a full team. For 6 weeks, we broadcast mathematical sequences and waited for responses. We got 3 more. Each response continued or modified the sequence we'd sent. When we broadcast the first 10 digits of pi, we received the next 5. When we broadcast a sequence of perfect squares, we received a sequence of perfect cubes. They understood mathematics. They were responding to demonstrate that understanding. But they never approached our equipment. They never showed themselves. They communicated only acoustically from distances we couldn't precisely determine. In February 1989, we shifted to visual communication. We programmed our light arrays to display simple pictographic sequences, a circle, a line, a triangle. Then combinations, circle plus line, triangle plus circle. We were trying to establish a shared vocabulary of shapes and concepts. The first response came in April 1989 at our station near the Mariana Trench. Our cameras caught an individual approaching the light array at 900 feet. Female, based on body structure, approximately 6 feet in length. She watched our light sequence for several minutes. Then she swam in front of the array and traced shapes with her hand, blocking the lights in patterns. She recreated our exact sequence. Then she added to it new shapes we hadn't shown, spirals, crossing lines, complex geometric forms. We recorded 12 minutes of this interaction before she left. The analysis suggested she was demonstrating capabilities beyond simple mimicry. She was showing us she could create new forms, combine elements, generate complexity. Over the next 2 years, we had 47 similar interactions across our 12 stations. individuals would approach, observe our light displays, and respond. Sometimes they recreated our patterns. Sometimes they generated new ones. Twice, in interactions lasting over 30 minutes each, they appeared to be trying to communicate specific concepts using combinations of shapes. We brought in linguists, mathematicians, and cognitive scientists. Everyone agreed this was communication. Rudimentary, limited by the medium we'd chosen, but genuine two-way exchange of information. The breakthrough came on February 14, 1991, off the coast of Tasmania. We'd refined our light array system to display more complex images, human figures, fish, boats, representations of the sun and moon. We were trying to establish shared references to the physical world both species inhabited. That night, an individual approached our array at 750 feet. Male based on size and body structure, larger than any individual we'd previously documented, approximately 8 feet in length. He watched our display sequence for 6 minutes. Then he did something unprecedented. He manipulated the lights. Somehow, we still don't completely understand the mechanism, he altered the refraction or reflection of our light beams. He bent them, redirected them, created new images by manipulating how the light moved through the water. He showed us an image of multiple individuals swimming together, then an image of what looked like structures, geometric forms that might have been artificial or natural, we couldn't tell. Then an image that clearly represented depth, light fading, darkness below. He was showing us his world, his people, his environment. The interaction lasted 34 minutes. When he left, our entire team sat in silence. We'd just experienced something no human had experienced before. Not just communication across species, communication with a species that possessed technology or techniques we didn't understand, that could manipulate our equipment in ways our physics said shouldn't be possible. The footage went to Langley. The analysis took 6 months. Physicists studied how the light manipulation was achieved and found no clear answer. The water conditions shouldn't have allowed that degree of light bending without equipment. Some suggested bioluminescence, but that didn't explain the precision and complexity of the images created. One researcher proposed that individuals possessed organs or capabilities for manipulating light that we'd never documented. Another suggested they might have technology, tools, or devices not visible in our footage. The debate continued, but the conclusion was clear. We were dealing with intelligence that potentially matched or exceeded human capabilities in certain domains. They'd demonstrated mathematical reasoning, symbolic communication, and technological or biological abilities beyond our understanding. Project Tethys continued until 1994, accumulating more interactions and responses. But that February 1991 encounter remained the most significant. It was proof that these beings weren't primitive or animal. They were sophisticated, capable of abstract thought and complex communication. It was also proof that they were choosing to remain hidden. They could communicate with us. They understood we were trying to reach them. But they maintained distance, never allowing close physical contact, never revealing their populations or territories fully. They were protecting themselves. And after what I learned about human history with them, I understood why. In March 1994, I was promoted to senior analyst and granted access to files I hadn't known existed. They were kept in a separate facility in Maryland, in a vault that required 3 different security clearances to enter. The files documented something MAD had been tracking since 1958, but never discussed openly: disappearances. Between 1958 and 1994, the agency had identified 183 cases of individuals who vanished in or near water under circumstances that couldn't be explained by drowning, equipment failure, or criminal activity. Each case met specific criteria: no body recovered, no wreckage found, no witnesses, and occurrence in areas where populations were known or suspected. The files were organized chronologically. I started with the earliest cases. June 1961, a Navy diver named Robert Chen disappeared during a training exercise off San Diego. He was working at 200 feet, part of a 4-man team testing new diving equipment. His 3 teammates surfaced on schedule. Chen didn't. Search teams found no trace of him. His equipment was never recovered. The water depth was 800 feet, survivable with proper gear, but Chen's air supply would have been exhausted within 2 hours. The investigation noted one detail. Sonar had detected an unidentified biological signature within 500 yards of the dive site, approximately 30 minutes before Chen's disappearance. The signature matched profiles associated with individuals. September 1967. A commercial fisherman named Sarah Oakes vanished from her boat off the coast of Maine. Her vessel was found adrift, engine running, no signs of struggle. The weather had been calm. Oakes was an experienced sailor who'd worked those waters for 15 years. Coast Guard investigators concluded she'd gone overboard, but they couldn't explain why. No one falls off a boat in calm seas without reason. Sonar data from a Navy submarine operating 40 miles away had recorded unusual acoustic signatures in Oakes's area roughly 2 hours before her boat was found empty. The patterns matched vocalizations documented in other encounters. The correlation wasn't definitive. The agency couldn't prove these disappearances were connected to populations, but the pattern repeated across 183 cases. Someone vanished near water. Searches found nothing, and monitoring equipment detected possible presence nearby. I spent 3 months analyzing the files. The geographic distribution matched known territories. The temporal distribution showed clusters during new moon phases, the same lunar correlation we'd observed in sightings. The victim profiles were diverse: military personnel, commercial fishermen, recreational divers, researchers, tourists. No obvious pattern in age, gender, or occupation, but there was one pattern. 67 of the 183 cases involved individuals who'd been in the water alone, not on boats but swimming, diving, or wading. Of those 67, acoustic evidence of possible presence existed for 41 cases. The implication was troubling. Were individuals taking people? And if so, why? The files included speculation, but no conclusions. Some analysts believed the disappearances were accidental, humans getting too close to territories and being attacked defensively. Others suggested individuals might be rescuing drowning victims and taking them somewhere we couldn't find them. A few proposed darker theories about captivity or experimentation. Nobody knew. We had correlation, but no causation. We had questions, but no answers. In May 1995, we got a case that changed everything. A marine biology graduate student named Michael Torres disappeared while conducting research off Puerto Rico. He was studying bioluminescent organisms at night, diving alone from a small boat. His equipment was found on the boat. His wetsuit, tanks, and lights were gone. Search teams found nothing. But Torres had been wearing a waterproof camera designed to record continuously. The camera was found 3 days later, washed up on a beach 12 miles from where he'd disappeared. The footage was intact. The camera showed Torres descending to approximately 150 feet, collecting samples, documenting organisms with his lights. At timestamp 2247, something appeared at the edge of his light range, a figure swimming toward him. Torres turned his camera toward it. The footage showed an individual, female, approximately 6 feet in length, approaching cautiously. Torres appeared to remain calm. His breathing rate on the audio track stayed steady. He held position, camera pointed at the individual, lights illuminating her clearly. She stopped about 15 feet away. For nearly 2 minutes, they observed each other. Torres made no aggressive movements. The individual tilted her head, studying him, then swam closer. 10 feet, 8 feet, close enough that facial features were clearly visible in the camera lights. Then, at timestamp 2251, 2 more individuals appeared, both male, both larger than the female. They approached rapidly from different angles. The female made a series of rapid vocalizations. The audio was clear enough to hear them distinctly. Torres began ascending. His breathing rate increased. The camera showed him looking up toward the surface, then down at the 3 individuals below him. They followed, matching his ascent speed, maintaining distance, but not letting him escape. At timestamp 2253, at approximately 80 feet depth, one of the males accelerated upward. The camera captured him reaching toward Torres. The footage became chaotic. Rapid movement, water turbulence, Torres's breathing rate spiking. Then, at timestamp 2254, the camera's angle shifted violently. For 3 seconds, the footage showed only darkness. Then the camera was falling, tumbling through the water, lights still on, showing brief flashes of the ocean floor as it descended. The camera landed at 240 feet and continued recording until its battery died 6 hours later. The footage showed only empty water. No sign of Torres or the individuals. Torres's body was never found. The footage went through extensive analysis. Marine behavior specialists, video forensics experts, and medical personnel all reviewed it. The consensus: Torres had been grabbed or struck by the male individual. The camera had been dislodged from his equipment. What happened after that was unknown. Was Torres killed? Taken somewhere? The footage didn't answer these questions, but it answered one question definitively. individuals could and did approach humans aggressively. Whether Torres had threatened them somehow, violated their territory, or simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, we couldn't determine. But the footage proved these beings weren't passive observers. They acted when they perceived threats or opportunities. The Torres case forced MAD to confront questions we'd been avoiding. If individuals were responsible for some or all of the documented disappearances, what did that mean for Project Tethys? Were we trying to communicate with a species that might be hostile? And if they were taking people, where were the bodies? I spent 18 months investigating that last question. I analyzed oceanographic data from areas where disappearances had occurred, looking for locations that might serve as disposal sites or hidden territories. I studied migration patterns, trying to identify locations they might take captured humans. I found nothing conclusive. The ocean is vast, bodies sink or get consumed by scavengers. If individuals were hiding something, they had millions of square miles and depths exceeding 30,000 feet to work with. By 1997, the disappearance files documented 247 cases total. The correlation with presence was undeniable, but the causation remained speculative. We couldn't prove they were taking people. We couldn't prove they weren't. What we could prove was that humans who encountered individuals sometimes vanished without explanation. And that reality changed how I viewed my work. I wasn't just studying an unknown species. I was studying something potentially dangerous, something that might see humans as threats or resources or simply obstacles to be removed. That knowledge sits heavy with me now, as I write this. I don't know what happened to Michael Torres or the other 246 people in those files. I don't know if they're dead or alive, victims or something else entirely. But I know the agency has those files. They've known about the disappearances for decades, and they've never told anyone. In August 1994, a French documentary crew filming marine life off the coast of Corsica captured 18 seconds of footage that nearly exposed everything MAD had been protecting for 36 years. The crew was led by a filmmaker named Philippe Rousseau, working for a Paris-based production company. Their documentary was about Mediterranean biodiversity. They had permits, professional equipment, and a research vessel staffed with experienced divers and underwater cinematographers. On August 7, 1994, at approximately 05:45 hours, they deployed cameras in shallow water near a beach on Corsica's eastern coast. The goal was to capture footage of marine life during dawn, the period when nocturnal species return to deeper water and diurnal species emerge. The cameras were positioned at depths ranging from 15 to 40 feet. At 06:12 hours, one camera captured movement in water, roughly 30 feet deep. 3 individuals, juveniles based on size, swimming near the sandy bottom. They appeared to be playing, chasing each other, diving, surfacing. The behavior looked remarkably similar to how dolphins or young seals play. The footage was clear. Morning light penetrated the shallow water. The camera was high quality, designed for professional documentary work. You could see anatomical details, the transition from torso to tail, the webbed hands, the facial features. You could see them breaking the surface briefly, heads emerging, then diving again. 18 seconds of footage that proved, definitively, that aquatic humanoids existed. The crew didn't realize what they'd captured initially. The camera operator was filming from shore, monitoring multiple cameras simultaneously. The footage was recorded on tape, but not reviewed in detail until later that day, when they returned to their vessel to process the morning's work. At approximately 1400 hours, someone in the editing room noticed the footage and called Rousseau. Rousseau reviewed it, called his producer in Paris, and began discussing how to verify the footage's authenticity before including it in their documentary. That conversation was conducted over a satellite phone. The call was intercepted by French intelligence services, who maintained surveillance on international communications for security purposes. Within 2 hours, the intercept was flagged and forwarded to appropriate departments. By 1800 hours, someone at DGSE, Direction Générale de la Sécurité Extérieure, France's external intelligence agency, recognized the significance and contacted the CIA. I received a call at 2200 hours Virginia time. I was at home, off duty. The voice on the phone identified himself as Deputy Director Marsh, the head of MAD operations. "We have a situation," he said. "French documentary crew has footage, real footage. You're on a flight to Paris in 4 hours. Pack for a week." I arrived in Paris on August 8th and was met by 2 CIA officers assigned to the Paris station. They briefed me during the drive from the airport. The documentary crew was still in Corsica, unaware that their footage had attracted attention. The production company in Paris had the master tapes in a secure facility. Our objective was recovery. The footage couldn't reach the public. The agency had multiple options: acquisition through legal means, acquisition through unofficial means, or, if necessary, destruction of the footage and any copies. I was part of a 6-person team. 2 CIA officers, 1 DGSE liaison, 2 technical specialists who could verify footage authenticity, and me. My role was scientific consultation. If the footage was real, I was to confirm it and provide documentation for the file. We met with the production company's owner on August 9th. The meeting occurred at DGSE offices in Paris. The owner, a man named Bertrand, was confused about why intelligence services wanted to discuss his documentary. He thought there had been some administrative error with filming permits. The DGSE liaison explained that the footage contained sensitive material that presented national security concerns. He didn't specify what those concerns were. He said the footage needed to be reviewed by government experts and might need to be classified. Bertrand protested. He had contractual obligations. The documentary was scheduled for broadcast. He had investors expecting returns. The footage was his property. The liaison was patient but firm. The footage showed something that fell under laws governing disclosure of classified information. Even if Bertrand hadn't known that when filming, the laws still applied. Releasing the footage could result in prosecution. Cooperating with the review process would result in compensation for any financial losses. I watched Bertrand's face as he realized he had no choice. He agreed to provide the master tapes for review. The technical specialists examined the footage for 6 hours. They checked for signs of digital manipulation, prosthetics, CGI effects. They analyzed lighting conditions, water refraction, anatomical proportions. They compared the footage to known hoax videos and to classified MAD footage of confirmed AH individuals. Their conclusion? Authentic. The footage showed real AH juveniles in natural behavior, no evidence of fabrication or manipulation. That night, the 6 of us met to discuss options. The DGSE liaison advocated for simple acquisition, pay Bertrand fair market value for the footage and any copies, classify it under French national security laws, and close the matter. The CIA officers argued for more thorough action, identify everyone who'd seen the footage, debrief them, ensure no copies existed outside our control. I argued for a third option, let Bertrand keep the footage, but convince him it showed something else. Create a plausible alternative explanation, make the footage worthless as evidence. The team considered my proposal. The technical specialists thought they could create documentation supporting a hoax narrative. The production company could be told the footage showed models or people in costumes, that they'd been tricked by someone. That narrative would be embarrassing for Bertrand, but not criminal. We spent the next 3 days building the alternative explanation. The technical specialists created analysis documents showing evidence of prosthetic construction. We identified a special effects company in Rome that had worked on marine creature effects for films. We created a paper trail suggesting someone from that company had been in Corsica during the filming period. On August 12th, we presented this analysis to Bertrand. We told him his crew had captured footage of a hoax, someone testing costume designs in shallow water, probably for a film project. We showed him our evidence. We explained that while the hoax was convincing, it wasn't real, and broadcasting it would damage his company's credibility. Bertrand was skeptical. He'd seen the footage. He knew what it looked like. But the DGSE liaison added weight to our explanation. He said the government had investigated the matter thoroughly. The footage showed a hoax. If Bertrand proceeded with broadcast, he'd face both reputation damage and potential legal action for promoting false information. Bertrand accepted our explanation. He agreed not to include the footage in his documentary. The production company was compensated for the lost content, a payment that came from a discretionary fund neither agency disclosed. The master tapes were confiscated under the hoax explanation. All copies were located and secured. The camera operator and the editor who'd first noticed the footage were debriefed and signed non-disclosure agreements. Rousseau, the filmmaker, was never told the complete truth. He believed the hoax story. I returned to Virginia on August 15th. I wrote a detailed report documenting the entire operation. The footage was added to MAD archives, classified at the highest level. But that week in Paris changed something in me. I'd watched us construct a lie, present it as truth, and use institutional authority to make people believe something they knew was false. Bertrand had seen the footage. He knew what it showed. But we convinced him to doubt his own perception because we represented government power and official expertise. That was when I started keeping my own documentation, not officially, not through MAD channels. Personal records, notes, copies of reports, coordinates, dates. I stored them in a safety deposit box in Maryland under a false name. I didn't know what I'd do with those records. I just knew I couldn't trust the agency to preserve truth when truth became inconvenient. 17 years later, those records became the evidence I'm using now to support this testimony. In 2003, MAD launched its most ambitious operation, a deep submersible exploration of the Mariana Trench, specifically targeting areas where acoustic monitoring had detected unusual activity patterns suggesting possible habitation. The operation was classified under a program called Deep Horizon. Officially, we were conducting geological surveys of trench formations. Actually, we were looking for evidence of population centers, breeding grounds, or constructed habitats. The submersible was a modified version of the Alvin, capable of reaching depths exceeding 15,000 feet. It had been equipped with enhanced camera systems, acoustic sensors, and robotic arms for collecting samples. The expedition included myself, 2 Navy pilots, and a rotation of specialists who'd analyze data from the surface support vessel. We conducted 17 dives between March and May 2003. The first 12 revealed nothing unusual: trench walls, hydrothermal vents, deep-sea organisms adapted to extreme pressure and darkness. Standard abyssal environment. On the 13th dive, May 8, 2003, we discovered something that changed everything I thought I understood about populations. We were exploring a section of the trench wall at 12,400 feet, documenting geological formations, when our forward lights illuminated something that didn't belong. Smooth stone structures embedded in the trench wall, not natural formations. These had regular geometric patterns, right angles, surfaces too uniform to be erosion or tectonic activity. The pilot, Commander Harris, maneuvered closer. Our cameras recorded what appeared to be an entrance, an opening in the trench wall approximately 8 feet high and 6 feet wide, framed by worked stone. The opening led into darkness. Our lights couldn't penetrate. "Are you seeing this?" Harris asked. I was. We all were. The surface team was receiving our video feed in real time. Harris received instructions through the comm system. Document thoroughly. Do not enter. Deploy reconnaissance drone. We spent 40 minutes documenting the entrance from every angle. The stonework was remarkable. Fitted blocks with minimal gaps, surfaces smoothed but not polished, construction techniques that suggested sophisticated engineering. The entrance wasn't alone. As we moved along the trench wall, we identified 6 more openings within a quarter-mile stretch, all similar in size and construction. We deployed 3 robotic drones, each equipped with cameras and lights, programmed to enter the openings and map whatever spaces existed inside. The drones were tethered with fiber optic cables that would provide real-time video feed up to 500 feet of penetration depth. The first drone entered the southernmost opening. The video showed a tunnel approximately 8 feet in diameter, walls smooth and regular, descending at a slight angle into the trench wall. The tunnel extended beyond our tether range, more than 500 feet. The drone encountered no obstacles, no debris, just smooth tunnel walls extending into darkness. The second drone entered a central opening. This tunnel branched. 30 feet in, it split into 3 separate passages. The drone followed the widest passage for 200 feet before encountering what appeared to be a chamber, a space wider than the tunnel with walls that curved upward. The drone's lights couldn't reach the chamber's far walls or ceiling. The space was too large. The third drone entered the northernmost opening. This tunnel also descended, but after 150 feet, it reached something that stopped the drone's progress, a blockage. Not collapsed rock or natural debris, a barrier, smooth, flat, vertical. The drone's lights showed what looked like a sealed door or gate, constructed from the same worked stone as the entrance. We retrieved the drones and surfaced. The video analysis took 3 days. The structures were artificial. No geological process could create tunnels that regular, chambers that symmetrical, or barriers that precisely fitted. Someone had built this. Something with engineering knowledge and construction capabilities had carved these spaces into the Mariana Trench wall at depths that should have made such work impossible. The implications were staggering. individuals weren't just living in the ocean, they were building in it. They had architecture, they had settlements or facilities or storage areas. They had claimed territory in the Mayu's deepest, most hostile environment on Earth and made it habitable. MAD immediately classified the findings at the highest level. Only 17 people were briefed on what we'd discovered. Instructions came down from the deputy director. Continue surveillance, deploy monitoring equipment, but do not attempt to penetrate the structures. We positioned acoustic sensors and cameras around the trench wall area. We monitored continuously for 6 months. The equipment recorded minimal activity, occasional acoustic signatures suggesting movement within the structures, but no individuals entering or exiting the openings we'd documented. In November 2003, we attempted another reconnaissance. We deployed a modified drone designed to penetrate deeper, equipped with better cameras and longer-range tethers. The drone entered the central opening, navigated to the branching point, and followed the passage to the large chamber the previous drone had located. This time, we piloted the drone to explore the chamber. The space was enormous. Our estimate suggested at least 200 feet in diameter, height undetermined. The chamber wall showed the same worked stone construction, but more significantly, the chamber contained objects. The drone's lights illuminated what appeared to be carved stone benches or platforms arranged around the chamber perimeter. In the center, a structure that might have been a table or altar, and along one wall, markings, carved symbols or pictographs, regular patterns that suggested writing or decorative art. We documented everything for 37 minutes. Then, the drone's tether caught on something. As we attempted to free it, the tether severed. We lost the drone. 2 days later, we deployed another drone into a different opening. This one was programmed to penetrate as deep as possible before we recalled it. The drone descended through tunnels for 800 feet, mapping the route, recording video. It encountered multiple chambers and passages, evidence of an extensive tunnel system. At 800 feet penetration, the drone's cameras detected movement ahead, something approaching. The video showed a figure swimming through the tunnel toward the drone. individual, male, large. He approached within 10 feet of the drone, examined it briefly, then grasped it with both hands. The drone's cameras showed him turning it over, studying the design, handling the tethered cable. Then he did something we didn't expect. He carefully detached the cable from the drone's housing, removed it completely, and placed it inside the drone's camera bay. The footage showed him closing the bay, then holding the drone and looking directly into the lens. For perhaps 5 seconds, he stared at the camera. His expression was unreadable. Then he swam away, carrying the drone with him. The drone continued recording for another 6 minutes before its battery died. The footage showed him navigating through tunnels, descending deeper, moving with confidence. That suggested familiarity with the environment. The tunnels were lit. We couldn't identify the light source, but there was ambient illumination beyond our drone's lights. He swam through multiple chambers, passing other individuals who were visible briefly in the footage. Then the recording stopped. We never recovered that drone. Sonar tracking showed it had been taken deeper than 15,000 feet beyond our monitoring range. The loss of 2 drones, and particularly the manner of the second loss, forced a decision. The deputy director ordered suspension of deep horizon operations. We were forbidden from entering the trench structures again. The area was designated off-limits, monitored remotely, but not approached directly. The message was clear: we'd found their territory. We'd entered uninvited. And they'd responded by removing our equipment and demonstrating they controlled that space. I studied the footage from that second drone hundreds of times over the following years. The way the individual handled our equipment showed familiarity with technology. He understood what the drone was. He knew how to disable it non-destructively. He chose to take it rather than destroy it. That suggested intelligence, curiosity, and most significantly, awareness that the drone represented observation by others. He knew we were watching. And he removed our ability to continue watching by taking our equipment to a depth we couldn't access. The Mariana Trench structures remain classified. No further expeditions have been authorized. The monitoring equipment we positioned continues operating, sending data to Langley. But we stopped trying to penetrate their territory because we'd learned what we needed to know. They weren't just surviving in the deep ocean. They'd built something there. They had permanent settlements, constructed spaces, possibly an entire civilization hidden at depths humans could barely reach. And they didn't want us finding it. Between 2004 and 2012, I focused on historical research. I'd seen evidence of intelligence, social structure, and technology. But I hadn't answered the fundamental question that had driven mad operations for decades. Why did they avoid us? The conventional explanation was simple. They feared exposure, capture, scientific exploitation. But that explanation assumed they were the weaker party in any potential interaction. The evidence suggested otherwise. They were intelligent, technologically capable, and physically adapted to an environment we could barely access. They weren't hiding from weakness. They were hiding from experience. I requested access to the complete archaeological database, every historical reference to aquatic humanoids that the agency had cataloged. I spent 8 months reading accounts from ancient Greece, medieval Europe, Pacific Island cultures, African coastal peoples, indigenous American tribes, hundreds of stories spanning thousands of years. The pattern I found was disturbing. Periods of frequent human interaction correlated consistently with subsequent population decline or extinction of populations in those regions. The Mediterranean between 1600 and 1700 documented extensive sightings and interactions. By 1750, sightings had virtually ceased. The North Sea showed similar patterns between 1400 and 1600, the Caribbean between 1500 and 1650. I cross-referenced these patterns with historical data on human maritime activity, particularly fishing and whaling industries. The correlation was undeniable. When populations became visible to human communities, humans hunted them. The documentation was explicit in some cases. A 1654 Dutch ship's log described crew members killing a mermaid caught in fishing nets off Denmark. The log noted they kept the body preserved in alcohol and sold it to a private collector in Amsterdam for a substantial sum. An English fishing company's records from 1723 included payment vouchers for bounties paid for merfolk, tails brought in by fishing crews off Cornwall. The records showed 18 payments over a 5-year period. A whaling captain's journal from 1842 described harpooning a strange fishwoman near Iceland. The journal entry was matter-of-fact, discussing it the same way it discussed whale catches. The captain noted the creature screamed most piteously and that its blood was red as any Christian's. These weren't isolated incidents. I found documentation of systematic hunting in at least 7 different geographic regions across 3 centuries. Fishing communities that discovered populations often treated them as another marine resource to be exploited. Some evidence suggested economic motives. bodies apparently had value to collectors, museums, and private exhibitions. Live capture was attempted in several documented cases, none successfully, but the attempts were recorded in letters and shipping manifests. Other evidence suggested fear-based killing. Communities that believed individuals were dangerous, demonic, or cursed would organize hunts to eliminate them from local waters. A 1677 French coastal town record documented a hunting expedition to cleanse the Bay of Demons masquerading as fish women. The most disturbing documentation came from a 1891 scientific expedition to the Philippines. A British naturalist's diary described capturing an juvenile, keeping it alive in a tank aboard ship for 3 weeks while attempting to study its physiology. The juvenile died. The naturalist noted disappointment that he'd been unable to keep it alive long enough for thorough dissection. The diary was clinical, scientific, treating the juvenile as a specimen. The naturalist showed no recognition that he'd captured something intelligent, something capable of suffering. The language he used was identical to how he'd described capturing fish or marine invertebrates. That diary entry made me physically ill when I read it. I sat in the archive room for 20 minutes, unable to continue reading. By 2012, I'd compiled a comprehensive analysis of human interactions across recorded history. The conclusion was inescapable. Every time populations became visible to humans, humans responded with violence, exploitation, or both. The populations that survived were those that learned to hide. The modern era hadn't changed that pattern, it had intensified it. Fishing technology had advanced. Sonar could detect them at distances impossible in previous centuries. Underwater cameras, submersibles, and monitoring equipment gave humans unprecedented access to deep ocean environments. From an perspective, humans weren't potential partners for communication or coexistence. Humans were an existential threat, a species that had proven repeatedly across centuries that contact meant death. They'd learned to fear us because we'd given them every reason to. I presented my analysis to MAD leadership in March 2012. The report documented the historical evidence, the patterns of hunting and exploitation, and the implications for current operations. My conclusion was direct. Project Tethys and all communication attempts were fundamentally flawed because they ignored the historical context. Individuals weren't avoiding contact because they didn't understand us. They avoided contact because they understood us perfectly. The report was classified and filed. No policy changes resulted. MAD continued its monitoring operations, continued deploying equipment in territories, continued attempting communication protocols. But something changed in how I viewed my work. I'd spent 32 years documenting, studying, and attempting to reach beings that had every reason to hide from us. I'd contributed to a program that sought to expose them, make them visible, bring them into human awareness. And I'd done it all without seriously considering what exposure might mean for them. That realization forced me to confront questions I'd been avoiding. What gave us the right to find them? What would humans do with that knowledge if we succeeded? History suggested the answer. We'd do what we'd always done. I continued working for MAD until 2016, but those 4 years felt different. I was going through motions, fulfilling obligations, but my commitment to the mission had eroded. I knew too much about why they hid. I understood their perspective too well. When I retired in 2016 at age 64, I took my security clearance and my oaths seriously. I kept silent. I didn't discuss my work with anyone. I tried to move on. But silence became harder when I learned what the agency was planning next. I retired from MAD in March 2016, For 7 years, I kept my oath. I didn't discuss classified information. I didn't contact journalists or researchers. I lived quietly in Maryland, worked as a consultant for private aquariums, and tried to forget about the beings I'd spent 36 years studying. In January 2023, I received a phone call from a former colleague who still worked at Langley. The conversation was brief, carefully worded to avoid explicit disclosure of classified information. But the message was clear. The agency had shifted from passive observation to active tracking. New satellite technology, new acoustic monitoring systems, new analytical capabilities that could detect and map populations with unprecedented accuracy. They were building a global tracking network. I started researching publicly available information about oceanographic satellite programs, military underwater surveillance systems, and classified budget allocations. The pattern was obvious if you knew what to look for. Defense contractors were receiving funding for marine biological tracking systems. Navy press releases mentioned new capabilities for deep ocean environmental monitoring. Satellite companies were launching constellations described as oceanographic research platforms. In June 2023, I used contacts from my consulting work to access information about a classified program called Ocean Census. The program aimed to create a comprehensive database of marine biological signatures worldwide, using satellite thermal imaging, acoustic sensor networks, and machine learning algorithms to track movement patterns. The official purpose was fisheries management and marine conservation. The actual purpose was mapping every population on Earth. Ocean Census represented everything I'd feared. For 65 years, MED had operated on the principle that exposure must be prevented, that populations needed protection through secrecy. Ocean Census abandoned that principle. It assumed exposure was inevitable and prepared for comprehensive surveillance. The program included protocols for what the agency called population management scenarios, contingency plans for if populations became publicly known or if their activities threatened human interests. Those protocols included options for containment, relocation, and in extreme scenarios, elimination. I spent 3 months verifying this information through multiple sources. Everything checked out. Ocean Census was real. It was operational. And it represented an existential threat to beings I'd devoted my career to studying. In September 2023, I made my decision. I began organizing my personal documentation, the records I'd kept since 1994, stored in a safety deposit box under a false name, coordinates, dates, encounter reports, photographs I'd retained copies of, analysis documents, everything I needed to prove what I'd witnessed. I contacted a journalist I'd researched carefully, someone with experience reporting on classified programs, someone with credibility and resources. I explained that I had information about a government program tracking non-human intelligence entities in Earth's oceans. The journalist was skeptical until I provided preliminary documentation proving my credentials and security clearance history. We met in November 2023. Showed her a fraction of the evidence. She verified my employment history with MAD through sources she wouldn't identify. She consulted with experts who confirmed that the technical details I provided were consistent with classified capabilities. In December 2023, she agreed to publish my testimony. I'm violating my security clearance. I'm breaking federal law. I face prosecution under the Espionage Act, which carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. I understand the consequences, but I've spent 7 years watching the agency move toward active intervention in populations. I've seen historical evidence of what happens when humans discover these beings, and I can't stay silent while we prepare to repeat that history with modern technology and institutional backing. These beings have existed alongside humanity for thousands of years. They've avoided us, hidden from us, and protected themselves from us because they learned we couldn't be trusted. Every encounter taught them. That visibility meant danger. Now we're developing technology that will make hiding impossible. We're building systems that will expose every population worldwide. And we're doing it in secret, without public debate about the implications, without consideration of their right to remain undiscovered. I'm 72 years old. I have no family, no dependents, no one whose life will be destroyed if I face prosecution. I have nothing to lose by speaking up and everything to lose by staying silent. The beings I studied aren't animals. They're intelligent, they have culture, they have technology, they have the same right to exist unmolested that any intelligent species has. But they can't advocate for themselves. They can't participate in human debates about their fate. They can only hide and hope we never find them. I'm speaking for them now because no one else can. The agency will deny everything in this testimony. They'll attack my credibility, suggest mental illness, produce experts who'll claim the evidence I've provided is fabricated or misinterpreted. They'll argue that I'm a disgruntled former employee with an agenda. But I've provided documentation. I've given coordinates for observation sites where anyone with proper equipment can verify that something is being monitored. I've given dates and locations for incidents that can be cross-referenced with other sources. I've described programs that leave paper trails in budget documents and contractor agreements. The evidence exists. People with resources and expertise can verify what I'm claiming. More importantly, ocean census exists. In the coming years, as that program becomes operational, reports will start emerging. Unusual sonar contacts, satellite imagery showing anomalies, leaked information from personnel who can't reconcile what they're observing with what they've been told. This testimony is a warning. The agency is preparing to expose populations whether those populations want exposure or not. When that happens, humanity will face a choice about how we respond to discovering intelligent life sharing our planet. History suggests we'll respond badly. We'll want to study them, contain them, control them. We'll treat them as resources or threats rather than as beings with rights and autonomy. I'm speaking now so that when exposure happens, someone will have already raised questions about whether we have the right to expose them at all. Someone will have already documented what we did to them historically. Someone will have already argued that they have the right to remain hidden. Maybe that argument won't change anything. Maybe humanity will do what it's always done when discovering something valuable and vulnerable. But at least I'll have tried to prevent it. That's why I'm violating my oath. That's why I'm risking prosecution. That's why I'm telling you this now. Because 44 years of keeping secrets taught me that some secrets protect the wrong people. And this one protects us from confronting what we might do to beings who only want to be left alone.